We are talking today with Elliot Adams. Elliot Adams is the president of Veterans for Peace. He was a paratrooper in the infantry serving in Vietnam, Japan, Korea, and Alaska. In addition to being president of VFP, he is also the nonviolent training coordinator for the organization and has done nonviolence training for many other organizations. Start out, if you would, and tell us a little bit about what is Veterans for Peace.
Veterans for Peace is an amazing organization. It is made up of members who have served in the military and had what the military would call a crystallization of thought, and have suddenly recognized that what we believed was a functional process of solving problems by violence is no longer a functioning process. We have about 7,500, a little over 7,500 members. A little over 120 active chapters across the country. A powerful organization, people who are dedicated to creating a better world. Our members, our work is divided amongst a wide array of stuff. Some of it is sort of what I would call reparations. It is taking that burden we receive from having committed what we see as not serving the better good, and trying to make repairs for that. So that's things like the Iraqi Water Project, where we are trying to deliver water to several Iraqi cities. Of course, the U.S. government bombed those, so we have now gone to individual small water purification things that a hospital can use a few of. We have several villages and several efforts in Vietnam, which are dealing with the Agent Orange problem in Vietnam, dealing with orphans in Vietnam, dealing with healthcare issues in Vietnam. Of course, many of our vets, the majority of them are Vietnam vets. We also are involved along the same lines in the court case against the corporations for the price being paid in Vietnam by Agent Orange. Now we have the third generation paying the price of Agent Orange in Vietnam. It's just a horrendous thing. We have people who are working on an impeachment campaign in the political realm. We have people who are working in truth in recruiting, trying to make sure that young children children who are considering going into the service have a realistic understanding of what the issue is. We, of course, did a which is sort of a little out of our realm, and we kind of fell into it. We did some very important work in relief in New Orleans, and we continue to do work there at not relief now, but it's more in the rebuilding and in connecting our veterans and trying to support our veterans there. We do work supporting veterans with the VA and trying to get care for depleted uranium. Many of our chapters have passed, and we did in New York State, have worked hard to get our legislatures to pass DU bills to try to get some support for those ones. We've worked on the atomic energy vets. The array of stuff we've done that our members are doing is just amazing and important.
So when did you first become aware of VFP, and what perked your interest in it?
I became aware of VFP fairly early. It just arrived in the mail. And obviously, that was a period of time when I was what I would call a closet vet. So I was dealing with part of my experience by not wanting to talk about the military, not wanting to talk about Vietnam, not wanting to talk about that experience. It was sort of it's sort of funny because at the same time I was very aware that what happened, I was very aware, let me put it this way, I was very aware that war could not give birth to peace, and that there was something very dysfunctional about that process. And I was struggling with things like, maybe war is terrible, but it is unavoidable. So I was very actively working my brain about this, but meanwhile I was trying to I was doing more than ignoring. I was actively pushing away the whole military experience, the whole Vietnam experience. I just can't handle it. So I joined VFP in the early 80s, in the 85, 86, I guess it was, but was not active. And like many veterans, what really outed me was George Bush. There's an old saying that new wars scratch open the old wounds of old vets. And it is such a truism. I mean, I just recently met a World War II vet who, for the first time, went for PTSD therapy because this war scratched open. I know if, we all know, or many people know, that more Vietnam vets have committed suicide since they came home than died in Vietnam by twice, thrice. We're not sure quite what the number is. But when we invaded Iraq, the Vietnam vets began committing suicide again, because it just brought back all that pain and hurt. And the World War II vets, as I just said, one of them that I know, his PTSD kicked in really for the first uncontrollable time. So I'm not quite sure where I was going now with that. What was the question?
Was when did you become aware and get involved?
Oh, yes. So that process tore me up, and I recognized that while I was active in the peace movement, I recognized that veterans had a special role to play, and that was we seem to both, it's still unclear to me what we do for the rest of the peace movement, but it was clear to me that we were doing something very powerful, something along the lines of validating and empowering the peace movement, and that it was necessary that I go back and dig up my veteranship and be a visible vet in the movement as an effective way to move towards ending this occupation and ending all war. One of the portions of the statement of purpose of Veterans for Peace is to abolish war as a tool of foreign policy, which is a big term, a big concept. So at any rate, it was this new war, this new unjust war, this new watching our young brothers and sisters having to go experience a terrible experience that forced me to come out as a veteran and be visible and speak out as a vet.
What were the circumstances that landed you in the military in the first place?
I'm not sure that the average civilian can understand this. I know most vets can. There's somewhere in my brain was this ability to say, I'm protecting my mother and sister from some little people 10,000 miles across the ocean in a country smaller than many of our states who have almost no weaponry, certainly can't get across a pond, let alone the ocean. I know that doesn't make sense. But then in going in the military, you often aren't thinking, when you're going in the military, you aren't thinking with your brain, you're thinking with what I sort of call a gut knowledge. It's a kind of knowledge that never processed through your brain. And that's why it's so effective. I talk to kids who were involved, or young people, I should say, who were involved in the Deferred Enrollment Program, DEP, and say, you don't have to go in. Because you don't. Under DEP, part of the legislation says that one of the ways you can break that contract is by not showing up. So all they have to do is not show up. And anybody who's in the DEP should be aware that if they have a second thoughts about it and don't want to go in, the recruiters are going to push them like heck and are going to tell them that they'll go to jail and everything else, because the recruiter doesn't get credit unless you actually go in. On the other hand, by the law, all they have to do is not show up. But when you talk to these people frequently, you find you use all your brain power to muster the rational and logical arguments, and it just doesn't. It seems like it doesn't go in because they aren't thinking there. They're thinking with this what I call gut knowledge. It's something you've inherited through the culture of the society. I remember when I was early on, when I came out as a vet, being in a Memorial Day parade and watching a little boy sitting on the sidewalk in shorts. Sun was beating down on him. He was sort of absent-mindedly waving an American flag, watching the parade go by. And it was very much a Norman Rockwell picture. And I started choking back tears because I realized that is what set me on the road to becoming a soldier. Now, there's nothing rational about that. that's coming in at some kind of a gut level, some kind of a emotional level. So that it was that part. And it was the culture and every person in America over, say, the age of maybe 30 owned a little piece of that, can I say, brainwashing, culturalization of me, which made it somehow logical that I could be protecting my mother and my sister from some little people 10,000 miles away in a primitive culture.
And then during your service in the military, were there specific things that changed your mind there?
My transition was not so much apocalyptic or epiphany. It was a process, and sort of the burden of evidence, the impression, and maybe it was gut knowledge too. Maybe it wasn't a rational process that happened, but it was just, I came out overwhelmed with the process and overwhelmed with the price of war, the price that the Vietnamese were paying for this war, the price I guess I wasn't so aware of the price my brothers and sisters were paying. Well, brothers in that war. So it wasn't a clear-cut moment. It's just that as you watch it, it's like, it's just so overwhelming, and the prices are so high. And then when you come home and you begin to understand how every single vet is basically a time bomb waiting for the PTSD to catch them, and that's not true, because there's a lot of people who... They used to tell us on the field that there were 21 people. It took 21 people to keep each one of us in the field. And there's, we had to have ammunition, we had to have water, we had to have food, we had to have directions, we had to have firepower. So that makes sense. And many of those people were not exposed, the majority of those people were never exposed to combat. So that I can't say all vets, but a huge number of vets are waiting for that experience to catch up with them. Some do it immediately. I think that the VA is now saying that the typical vet won't show any signs of PTSD for, I think it's like a year or so, or 3 years, 1 to 3 years. Certainly some don't show it for 30, 40 years, 20 years. But fairly, once you come back and watch the vets, you see it's very clearly that the price that's paid is so terribly high, and it's carried on. And the other thing, too, is that the price is not paid only by the vets. I like to think of each soldier coming home is like a drop on a lake. And how do we deal with PTSD? What are the usual ways of dealing with our PTSD? It's things like drug abuse, alcohol abuse, suicide, spousal abuse. And each one of these things has tremendous impact around them. When somebody commits suicide, the people around them are frequently really traumatized for a long time. When somebody gets caught in the trap of spousal abuse as their only way of dealing with an issue, then that radiates to the spouses and the children. Alcoholism, drug, they're all very painful. So each vet is like a drop falling on a clear lake, and that pain radiates out from them and reaches the far shores, and then reflects back and comes back across the lake. I was doing a workshop on a woman who was in the workshop, broke down, which often happens, broke down in tears, which often happens or frequently happens in that kind of workshop. So I was working with her, and her life had been dominated by her father's abuse. And her life had been framed by trying not to be the link that passed that violence from her father's generation to her children's generation. And she struggled with the idea of, this is my father, I should love him, but how do I love an abuser? And that framed her whole life. And during the workshop, she realized, it started when he came home from Korea. So this stuff goes from generation to generation. But going back to that lake with that ripple going all the way across the lake and reflecting back, when we have a war, it's not a drop hitting the lake. It's like a bloody rainstorm on that lake. just tearing the surface up, not only with the initial impact, but the radiating that goes on from generation to generation. So the price we pay is just so high, and that's not even talking about the price we pay monetarily, structurally. So how any vet who looks at war and is able to disarm themselves from the protection, and we often have a huge protection. How do we face some of these things? How do we face that the price we paid was for a totally unreasonable reason and a totally unjust war? How do we say that traumatic experience, both for some proud, for many, and for so many people, was sort of a defining moment in their life? How do you say that defining moment in your life was for naught, or was for a bad reason? So I understand that many vets cannot take down that protection to look at it realistically. But when you do, there's no way you can see it as being anything but an appalling process. War is, and a price we pay amazingly high price for.
So, what was your view of, during the Vietnam War, what was your view of the anti-war movement then, and how has your viewpoints on that integrated into your work with the anti-war movement now?
Well, I have to be honest. When I was in Vietnam, I had no idea what was going on anywhere else. We used to call it the world. I had no awareness of it. Certainly, I would have been delighted if anybody was doing anything they could to get me the hell out of there. I didn't want to be there. Who would? So anything that anybody did would have been fine for me. I think, frankly, I wouldn't have minded if they burned the whole country down, if that would have gotten us out of there. So I think that, and certainly on that same relevance, I talked to moms who have kids over there who are saying, my son says anything you can do would be wonderful. I'm really proud of your work there. The sons are saying, I have to fill my duty here in Iraq because that's what I agreed to do, but anything you can do to make that duty not necessary is wonderful. And certainly, if you believe in democracy, that means that each one of us has a responsibility for the government, not just an ability to say, oh, I voted and that's my fulfillment of responsibility. We're responsible for everything the government does, and we are responsible to take an active participation in that. And that means that you can't be in a democracy and say, well, I think the war is wrong, but I'm going to go on and live my life and just vote. It means you have to take an active participation in changing that process. I feel that even though I have been opposing this war since before it started, I still own a piece of it because I haven't stopped it yet, and I have to keep that struggle going on. So that I guess for the American public, the message is always the same, which is that if it is a democracy, and you believe it's a democracy, you need to be out there actively committed to what you believe in, or else it's not a democracy. I like to say, democracy is not a noun; it's a verb. And one of the mistakes we've made one of the mistakes I think we've made in our country is the idea that democracy is guaranteed by a body of laws. And while I hold the Constitution very high, I understand now that the Constitution cannot give us democracy by itself. It requires that the people of that democracy demand that they have a democracy, and that they prove that democracy is real by doing it. One of the funny things we have is this belief that, we say democracy is not free, and that is absolutely true. But we have this funny belief that soldiers defend democracy. Soldiers defend governments, and those who govern usually take away our rights and take away our democracy. It is we the people who defend our democracy. It's people who violate unjust laws. Laws are frequently wrong. If you look at the Nazi regime, Every single thing Hitler did was justified by a law. The laws were wrong. What made Nazi Germany possible, excuse me, were Germans who were willing to be obedient to unjust laws. So freedom is not free. But what defends freedom is people who violate unjust laws, lawyers who defend unjust laws, people who test their rights at every opportunity, exercise those rights, test them, push against the government anytime the government wants to hold back your rights. You know, it's funny. When I was a kid, and I think most people will remember these days, we thought this country had freedom of speech. We didn't understand this idea of free speech zones. I thought it was a country of free speech, not little isolated pockets somewheres. And it will be free speech zones, which will get smaller and smaller until we say, hogwash. This is a free country. We demand free speech everywhere. And that's up to the people. The government will never give it. Remember during the civil rights movements, people like Dr. King said, white man cannot give you your rights. You have to generate your rights. You have to fight for your rights. You have to struggle for your rights. You have to that freedom has to come from those who aren't free, nobody gives it to you. And the American people have lost that.
So what do you see as solutions with challenging that whole gut check, the socialization that initially launched you over into Vietnam and probably sends so many of us towards conflicts that we later realize aren't right?
Well, I think we all have to take responsibility for ourselves and our government. I think to a couple of things. I think back to, and I get our forefathers confused, but both Mao Zedong and I think it was Jefferson said, one said there needs to be a revolution every generation, and the other said there needs to be a revolution every 20 years. Well, it's confusing. But I think what both of them were saying is you have to reinitiate the vitality of the government, the vitality amongst the people, that they understand that the government is in them and that they need to be active and participating about it. One of the mistakes we've made in this country is we started saying, well, we can't talk politics in polite society, politics and religion in polite society. That's wrong. We have to learn how to talk politics in polite society. We need to talk politics everywhere. We were just talking earlier today about people who say, well, this is not political. Everything is political. And to say something is not political is to abdicate your responsibility to be political and to give it to somebody else. And that is a very political statement. And, we talk about, I go back to Frederick Douglass a lot. Frederick Douglass said, find out what a people will put up with in silence, and you will have found the exact amount of injustice and wrong which will be imposed upon them. Now, many people don't see it as being injustice imposed upon them, but, somebody in this country, in this world, is, for economic gain, is running us into an environmental disaster. Somebody in this world, for economic gain, is having our children die in Iraq, is spending the money of future generations, is depriving us of money for health care, is depriving us of money for education. When I was a young man, anybody could go to college. There was always money to go to college, and now there's not. There's something wrong with that picture. So somebody is doing these things, and they will, and that is a justice and imposition on the people, and that exists because we have not decided to stand up and say we won't take it. And that can be frightening. because it can almost look like a violent revolution. And for a while, that scared me. And then I realized, well, wait a minute, that's not true. First of all, I don't believe I firmly believe a violent revolution won't work. Violent revolutions have never returned the power to the people. So while I was afraid of that, and then I realized, but of course, every single time we have had a social movement, whether it be the civil rights movement, whether it be gay lesbian liberation, whether it be the feminist movement, whether it be women's suffrage, I mean, the list is long, whether it be the 8-hour workday, the 40-hour work week, whether it be Social Security, all the things we hold valuable in this country are things that people demanded. And the only reason we got it was because people demanded it. All the important things, all the things we used to hold important. And, I need to pause and say, the change that has happened in this country since I was a kid is staggering. We used to believe an 8-hour work week was virtually a guaranteed thing, a 40-hour work day. We thought that it was guaranteed that our children would live a better life than we do. We assumed that people could go to college. We assumed the society would provide a social safety net. So when those traumatic things happen, there was a safety net that would keep you from falling too far. We believed that we did not want to see people starving in the streets. And that's changed. And that's not good for the country. And that's changed because we aren't demanding otherwise. And that is the wrong and injustice which is being imposed upon us because we aren't demanding it.
We are just about out of time. How can people find out more about Veterans for Peace?
Oh, and I failed to give our website at the very beginning. That is, thanks for bringing it up, of course, www.veteransforpeace, spelled out, .org. It's a great place to contact us. Our office is in St. Louis, but I would suggest going to our website and looking for chapter contacts and seeing if we don't have a chapter nearby where you can contact our local chapters. That is the power and the strength of the organization, is our local chapters, and that's a great place to connect with us.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. I want to thank you very much for spending time with us today.
It was a pleasure, and thank you very much for your time, Michael.
We've just been talking with Elliot Adams. He is the president of Veterans for Peace. And again, you can find out more via their website at veteransforpeace.org.